My girlfriend and I went to see Gravity in 3D last night, and while I must say it's probably the best looking space movie that I've ever seen, I did have a couple of problems with it, even though I really enjoyed the movie. The first thing I would say is that for science fiction movie purists who enjoyed 2001 Space Odyssey for its depiction of space travel in the future and its specific focus on realism, I would say that even though the soundtrack for Gravity was excellent, I felt that the soundtrack actually took away from the realism. Because what the movie tried to focus on was the absolute vulnerability that astronauts would have if they were ever untethered or if they ever got into a situation where they were falling violently or rotating violently and unable to right themselves because they have no reaction control system on their suits or on a jetpack. I feel that the movie got that very right, and they also did a great job of claustrophobia and making you feel like you were locked in to the suits with the person. I felt that they did a really good job with that. They did a really good job making you feel claustrophobic inside the space, the capsules and the ISS station. But my problem was the soundtrack took away from the overall experience, even though it was an excellent soundtrack. If you go and rewatch 2001 Space Odyssey, one thing you'll notice is that they did their best not to play the soundtrack when they were doing the dramatic scenes. And they also did their best to make sure that you couldn't hear any sound whatsoever, especially when the shot was coming from outside of the shuttle or outside of the ship or outside of the station. And Gravity seemed like they were trying to reach for that, but apparently Hollywood demands that if you're going to have a dramatic scene, that you absolutely have to amp it up with, an adrenaline pulsing soundtrack, and that you also have to have like the little trick shots where you have scary faces and things popping up off of screen in order to scare you. But that's what Hollywood is today, and that's why most movies suck. Gravity does rise above that, though. The second thing I had a problem with was at some point in the movie, I'll try not to give away a spoiler, but at some point in the movie, you've got a situation where a person is using a propulsion device. I'm not going to tell you what, but they're using a propulsion device in order to propel themselves in a certain direction. Now, the movie Apollo 13, in my opinion, along with 2001 Space Odyssey, are the absolute most realistic space movies I've ever seen. Now, 2001 Space Odyssey was science fiction, but Apollo 13 was really science fact because it was based on the Apollo 13 failed mission, which was a successful failure because they returned alive, but even though, the mission never landed on the moon. But Apollo 13 made you understand just how much mathematics and how much calculation had to go into propelling yourselves. Otherwise, you fall off course or you become too shallow and you could burn up in the Earth's atmosphere, this, that, and the other. Apollo 13 also had a far more realistic, and I don't want to give away a spoiler, but I'll say Apollo 13 had far more realistic ship physics. There's a certain point in this movie where this movie Gravity, there's a certain point where there's absolutely no way that I don't even want to say it, but that I'll just say the ship could do what it did and not either be destroyed or not burn up. I'll just say it just like that and I'll leave it like that. But Apollo 13, because it was based in reality, Apollo 13 was far more realistic because they basically took data from NASA and they used it to recreate what actually happened, and they also used the astronauts. On the third front, I felt that Apollo 13 was a far more emotionally engaging film, and like most people who I've showed Apollo 13 to, or most people I've watched it with, I've never seen anybody get to the ending with a dry eye. Like, that movie will actually make you cry just because when you see the astronauts finally return to Earth, it's like that's what it is to be an American, if I could phrase it that way. But Gravity overall was an excellent movie. The one thing I might ask is that if any of the producer or anybody actually hears this, I would ask that maybe some people petition that when the Blu-ray comes out, that there be two versions of the film. One with the movie theatrical version where the soundtrack's in place, and then another one where you can take the soundtrack and all of the external shot sounds out. So this way, every time you're outside in space and the shot is focusing on an astronaut inside a shuttle or inside a spacesuit, that at that point you don't hear any sound, because as you know, if you're going for the realism, once you're outside of the shuttle or outside of the suit or whatever, you don't hear any sound because there's no air in space. And I really liked the soundtrack, and a lot of the music in the soundtrack was fantastically done. It was Hans Zimmer level. A lot of the camera shots reminded me of a lot of the Call of Duty shots where basically all you can see is your hands and whatnot. But it was really well done, and I really liked the film. I give it like 4.5 out of 5 stars, but they really ought to fix that soundtrack issue when they release the Blu-ray. So I'm just going to leave it at that. But I really like the movie, and I definitely think it's worth full price to see it in 3D, because if you don't see it in 3D, you're wasting your money. There were a lot of effects that really made good use of the 3D technology.